despite numerous incentives for SME growth announced in today's budget, critics say that the budget has not gone far enough to support enterprise development, as you heard earlier on. We continue with our panel discussion. Our guests are Lumkile Mondi, Chief Economist and Vice President of the Industrial Development Corporation, political economist and Vice Chair of the South African Institute of International Affairs, Moeletsi Mbeki, and in Cape Town, Crispinn Sonn, Executive Director of Corporate Affairs at Old Mutual. Crispinn, let's start with you. Can the government afford this? They have revenue of 824 billion, but they intend to spend 929 billion.
I'd argue it is a tight squeeze, and I think if one once again goes back to the multi-year budget framework that the Minister has presented, it is a tight squeeze. They're going to have to certainly meet their targets and their projections with regards to revenue collection, and a significant burden rests on SARS and on the performance of the economy to ensure that the tax base can sustain this. I guess an important question, though, if I may, is can the government not afford it? And I think the most important statistic for me that the Minister presented today was something that we're well familiar with, and that's the fact that the population of people between the ages of 18 and 24, 52% of them are unemployed. If one looks at that being the median age in South Africa, it not only was this job budget and job focus important, it was very important to focus on the right segment of society, who one would argue are growing quite restless about the fact that opportunities are so limited. So if one looks and projects the economy at the next 10 years, government has very little choice but to make very focused interventions around job creation.
I want to challenge you.
They will be punished if they don't manage deficit.
I want to challenge you, Crispinn. Within this plan for expenditure, there's already an additional 73 billion allocated to some sort of a public works program over and above the broader infrastructure spend. Now, if government's intervening to create jobs by way of a stopgap measure, is it working? Why do we have 24% unemployment when for the last 18 months we've seen these sort of public sector jobs being created by the state?
The question, the issue I raised on an earlier point in the discussion is exactly the concern I've had is the question around the efficiency of the spend of the money and the agencies being tasked with this investment. Infrastructure spend is a job creation opportunity, but it is also absolutely an enablement of large corporations, not necessarily small enterprises. Large corporations benefit because it's enabling technology. So I would argue and I would agree that it's necessary, but I would also agree that if it's not managed efficiently, we are potentially running the risk of wasting money, and we're running the risk of losing our credibility in the international community if we don't arrest the deficit decline.
Are you concerned about the debt?
For me, that was the single most striking feature of the budget. And I was expecting the Minister to sort of warn us that now I'm coming to the difficult part, which is the borrowing that we have to go through. He moved from a few hundred indebtedness to over $1 trillion. So I was asking myself, now how are we going to service this debt? Point number one. Point number two, we already are refusing to service the debt for the ring roads around Johannesburg, which is where the toll system is being challenged and is being opposed. The government has had to backtrack on it, but the Minister is saying he's going to borrow more now to, I don't know, 1-point-something trillion.
By 2014,
now,
yeah.
If the people refuse to service that debt, then what will happen to South Africa in the international financial world?
39% of GDP is what debt will be by the year 2040.
The biggest challenge is the interest thereof, which we think it's going to be escalating much more rapidly. I think at the moment we're looking just over 77 billion rand of interest spent to service the current debt. So the challenge is then, as the economy continues to struggle, because I don't think the economy is going to come out unless the constraints are being addressed. And government is taking a lot of time to address those. So if my assumption is right, as you can hear, I'm a bit negative on the constraint side. Therefore, if you follow my line of thought, it means that the corporate taxes are going to continue declining going forward. Therefore, it's going to have to look for money elsewhere, which will come back to us, the middle class and the elite. And therefore, it's not sustainable in the short, in the medium to long term. And I'm quite worried that we're going back to the old days of high levels of indebtedness.
Okay, I want to just move the conversation along. Crispinn, briefly, social services, bit more money allocated towards healthcare and education and those sorts of issues, enough to dent poverty?
Regrettably, no. I think we, as a collective in South Africa, have a long way to deal with poverty. And I think it's not only about social spending, it's about really enabling people to participate more meaningfully in the economy. Huge concerns around national health insurance. I think the big issue there is the efficiency with which it could be operated, implemented and managed, and whether it sufficiently addresses the provision of healthcare, not the funding of healthcare, but the provision of healthcare. So all of these things are important issues at a socio and political level. The question is, how effective will it be administered, and are we focused on the right areas? And that specifically comment is focused on the national health insurance.
National health insurance, and we're told that at the moment it's still in the design phase, but he's mentioned some sort of family health care facility. VAT, payroll tax, maybe areas where you source the money for it?
Well, this is a topic that gets discussed over and over and over. Myself, I would like to see the government implement this policy if they really think it can work, because discussing, it's like nationalization of the minds. The more you discuss, the more anxious the population get, the stakeholders get, and then they hold back on taking investment decisions. If the government is serious about the national health insurance, then let them go ahead with it, and then we will know where we all stand. What is happening now is that they are freezing. They are leading to people who need to invest, freezing their investment because they feel threatened. So I'd rather see the action, and more action and less talking.
National health insurance, but I'm going to add to that. A few years ago, we heard mooted a social savings scheme. How far have we come on all those fronts?
Well, there's a lot of attempts in the budget going forward, ranging from the announcement around firstly taxing employer contribution into our retirement annuity schemes, and therefore increasing our contribution that is tax-free to about 22.5%. So this is quite positive if you're going to pay for yourself. But at the same time, the danger of linking the pension fund, the provident fund, by allowing us on our voluntary retirement packages to take only a third, is that it's going to create a lot of new ways of taking your retirement money out into the system, and therefore not address the problem of forcing people to save. So the state has to continue searching for answers. It is very, very difficult in a society of South Africa, where people are consumer driven. We enjoy our spending, we live on debt, and that's how we are. This is what defines us. So I'm not so sure how one can mobilize a social savings scheme without the state having to come into the party and run a deficit to support a lot of people.
All right, as one heavily indebted South African to another, thank you very much. Lumkile Mondi, Chief Economist and Vice President of the IDC. Moeletsi Mbeki, thank you for your time, political economist and also the Vice Chairperson of the South African Institute of International Affairs. In Cape Town, Crispinn Sonn, Executive Director of Corporate Affairs at Old Mutual.